All right, let's dive in. We're going deep on the Mauritian economy today, using the latest November update from, well, us here at Mauritius 360. But don't worry, no boring spreadsheets here. We're going to make sure you come away actually understanding what's happening. Like, you're right there on the island feeling the pulse.
Couldn't have picked a better time for it, really. Mauritius is in this really interesting spot, bouncing back strong, lots of growth potential, but also gotta be realistic, some bumps in the road too.
Absolutely. I mean, the GDP growth right off the bat, 7.1% year-on-year for Q2. Exactly what we saw in Q1, so holding steady, which is solid. But the more fascinating thing is where that growth is coming from.
Construction and agriculture, those are leading the pack. Construction especially booming. I mean, up 55.3% just in Q2.
Yeah.
Makes you think, what's driving that? Is it all internal demand, or are there some things happening globally that are playing a role?
Yeah. It's a great question, especially when you look at tourist arrivals actually being down these past couple of months. But overall, tourism is still projected to be a big growth driver for the whole year. So you've got this kind of contradiction, construction way up, tourism a bit shaky. What's the story there?
Well, it could be pointing to a shift, like maybe Mauritius is becoming less reliant on tourism with construction filling in the gap. But then the question becomes, can that last? Can construction really carry that weight long term?
And this is where it hits home for you, our listeners. Imagine you're thinking about investing in Mauritius. Knowing where that growth is and if it's sustainable, that's crucial stuff.
No doubt about it. Now, switch gears to consumers for a minute. Another interesting dynamic is playing out there. Inflation's easing up. Government social programs are giving folks more spending power. In fact, headline inflation down to 3.8% in September, getting close to what the Bank of Mauritius wants to see. But
Always a but, right?
always. The trade deficit, it's widened to MUR 19.2 billion in August. And that makes you wonder, is all this extra spending driving that? It's got to be part of the equation, right?
Makes sense. More money in people's pockets, they're likely buying more. And here in Mauritius, a lot of what we buy is imported. So you have this internal push and pull, spending's up, but the deficit is growing too. And on top of that, the government's trying to manage all of this.
They've got a lot on their plate for sure. Trying to boost exports, bring in more foreign investment, and tackle this housing situation. Their big plan, building 12,000 social housing units by 2025, that's probably playing a role in this construction surge we're seeing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Provide affordable housing, you stimulate the economy, and you address a real need for people. But again, long term, is it a solution?
And here's where the global picture comes into play. You can't ignore, while some might say the elephant in the room, maybe more like a cyclone on the horizon, geopolitical tensions, commodity prices going up and down. Those things impact a nation like Mauritius that relies on imports.
So even with the best internal efforts, those outside forces can really throw a wrench in the gears. For you listening, this means you got to think bigger picture. How might things like shifts in global trade partnerships affect your decisions about Mauritius?
It all leads back to tourism, this constant force in the Mauritian economy. Vital, volatile, and full of contradictions.
We see that in the numbers. Overall growth in tourist arrivals this year, 967,976 by September. That's up 7.4% year-on-year. The government's aiming for 1.4 million tourists by the end of 2024. Pretty ambitious. But then you have that dip in August and September. Makes you wonder if those targets are realistic, especially given all this uncertainty we've been talking about.
And this is where it becomes your story. If you were advising the government, how would you strike that balance? Promoting tourism but not being too reliant on one sector. What strategies could create an economy that's more resilient, more diverse?
Those are the questions we love to spark here on The Deep Dive. And speaking of sparking, let's dive into another hot topic: foreign exchange reserves. As of September, they're up to MUR 372 billion. That's about USD 8 billion.
Healthy number, gives you an import cover of 12.3 months. Basically, it's a cushion for the economy if things get rough. Think of it like if tourism revenue suddenly dropped, those reserves could help keep essential imports flowing.
A safety net for the island. But it gets even more interesting when you look at the Mauritian rupee. It's been appreciating against the US dollar, and the Bank of Mauritius has actually been intervening in the forex market, selling USD 335 million to banks since April.
The Central Bank's Balancing Act. A stronger rupee, that makes imports cheaper, good for consumers, good for businesses relying on those imports.
But there's that word again.
But it can make things you're trying to sell overseas more expensive, which can hurt industries that rely on exports.
So for our listeners, what are the long-term effects of these forex moves? How will they impact different parts of the Mauritian economy? And ultimately, you. These are the key questions.
Complex stuff, but that's what makes this deep dive so interesting, wouldn't you say? We're going beyond the surface of the Mauritian economy, seeing how all these internal and external forces are playing out.
Exactly. We've gone from GDP figures to global trends, from construction booms to dips in tourism. A lot to digest, for sure. But this is just the beginning.
Yeah, so far it's like a snapshot, right? An economy that's moving forward, but it's a complicated picture, you know? There's definitely a sense of things are going well, that steady growth, but got to acknowledge those global uncertainties and how much tourism can swing things.
It is. It's like walking a tightrope, balancing what's going well here with those things happening out there that, well, sometimes you just can't control.
Exactly, and it brings up a really crucial point. How can Mauritius make sure this growth isn't just a blip, that it lasts? Like we talked about construction, great in the short term, but what happens when those social housing projects are finished?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, right? What are the ripple effects? If
Hmm.
construction slows down, what takes its place? What happens to jobs? These are the things smart investors should be thinking about.
Absolutely. And it all circles back to needing more than just one or two things doing well. That's diversification, building an economy that's more balanced so it can handle the bumps.
And of course, that brings us back to tourism. I mean, it's such a big part of Mauritius, that goal, 1.4 million tourists by the end of next year. It's bold. But those dips in arrivals recently, that's a reality check, isn't it? How do you adapt when global travel is changing so fast?
I think it's about going beyond, the classic image. Sun, sea, and sand. Mauritius is so much more than that. The culture, the incredible natural beauty. You can really do a lot with ecotourism at adventure travel.
Yeah, create those experiences that appeal to a different kind of traveler, someone who wants to really connect with a place. And that feeds into the sustainable tourism idea too, right? Protecting what makes people want to come here in the first place.
Exactly. It's thinking long term, making sure tourism benefits everyone in Mauritius and the environment, not just now, but for years to come. And that takes planning, smart investments, and a willingness to try new things.
And speaking of new things, can't forget technology's role in all of this, shaping Mauritius's economic future.
Now, this is where it gets really exciting. Mauritius has what it takes to be a tech hub for the whole region. We're already seeing it. Growth in fintech, AI, renewable energy.
This is where our listeners who are into tech, the startup scene, this is for you. What are the opportunities here for investment, for starting a business? Where can Mauritius be a leader globally?
These are the questions that'll really determine where Mauritius goes in the next few years. It's about building that culture of innovation, attracting the best talent, creating an environment where tech startups can flourish.
It's about building the Mauritius of tomorrow. Not just beautiful and welcoming, but also economically vibrant, at the forefront of technology.
And of course, we can't forget about managing inflation. It was easing in September, but it's a delicate dance. Global commodity prices, supply chain issues, those can all affect how much things cost here in Mauritius.
It's a reminder that even when things are looking up internally, those external factors can always surprise you. For our listeners, it means staying informed, understanding how what's happening globally could impact your own finances.
And speaking of finances, let's loop back to the Bank of Mauritius and those Forex interventions. They're trying to keep the rupee stable, but it's tricky. There can be winners and losers.
Right, like we were saying, a stronger rupee helps importers but can hurt exporters. It's a balancing act, and the Bank of Mauritius is right in the middle of it.
And for you listening, think about what that means for you. Are you involved in import or export businesses? How could these changes in the currency affect you? These are the kinds of questions that turn data into something you can act on.
That's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive, giving you the knowledge to make informed decisions. But we're not done yet. There's one last piece of the puzzle we need to look at.
We've looked at the numbers, the trends, but there's something more fundamental we need to consider. The role of good governance, transparency, in making sure this economic success lasts.
Ah, now we're getting to the heart of it. It's not just the numbers themselves. It's about creating a system that's fair, equitable, accountable.
Yeah, things like how easy is it to do business here? What are the regulations like? And how do you combat corruption? Those are really the foundations you need for a strong economy, one that can grow in a sustainable way.
It's about creating that environment where businesses can really thrive, investors feel confident, and where everyone in Mauritius benefits from that growth, not just a select few.
Exactly. And for everyone listening, this means looking at the bigger picture. It's not just about the numbers themselves, it's about understanding the systems, the structures that create those numbers.
It's about going deeper than just the headlines and asking those tough questions,
Yeah.
like, is Mauritius really a level playing field for businesses? Are the institutions transparent? Do they hold themselves accountable? These are the things that determine whether success will last.
And it actually goes back to what we were talking about with diversification. A truly resilient economy, it's got to be built on good governance, transparency. It's about creating an ecosystem where innovation can happen, where entrepreneurs are rewarded, and where the benefits of growth are spread fairly.
It's about building a future for Mauritius, where prosperity isn't just, a statistic, but something real that everyone experiences.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Mauritian economy, let's take a step back. What have we learned? We've seen a nation that's moving forward, for sure, but navigating a landscape with both opportunities and challenges.
We've seen steady GDP growth, driven by those key sectors, construction and agriculture, but also that need to diversify, to not put all our eggs in one basket.
We talked about how tourism can be so unpredictable and how important it is to build a model that's sustainable, one that can weather the storms.
We even got into the nitty-gritty of foreign exchange reserves, how the Bank of Mauritius is working to keep the rupee stable, and how tricky that can be.
And we can't forget about that underlying foundation, good governance and transparency, to make sure all this progress we're seeing can continue.
It's been a fascinating journey, right? Peeling back the layers of the Mauritian economy, understanding its complexities, but also its incredible potential.
And for everyone listening, I hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights, maybe even sparked some questions of your own.
Like always, we encourage you to keep digging deeper, stay informed. Use this knowledge to make those smart decisions, whether you're an investor, a business owner, or just someone who cares about Mauritius. Understanding what shapes the economy, it's more important now than ever.
Remember, knowledge is power. And in today's world where everything's so connected, that power comes from understanding those nuances, those connections, that bigger picture.
So keep diving deep, stay curious, and we'll see you next time as we explore the forces shaping our world.